Are the cameras over there?
It's more of a practice than a burning.
Right here. With this. This order outside of
So off the record, or this is not really, but before we start, we would just like to get an idea. So we have this ending. The final meeting for this, being the 21st of May, thinking that the following weekend is a holiday weekend and people will not be around. How many of you will be around
A Memorial Day.
Memorial weekend?
Maybe, probably.
Okay. More than likely, we will go ahead and have this faith forum on the 28th. The reason being that there is a lot of material in this book, and right now, the way it's divided up, you would be reading about 65.7 pages for each week. And that's a lot. It's not heavy reading by any stretch, but it's just a lot of reading. So just to give you a sense, and part of that is because I had to commit a long time ago to what would be included in this first week. And it's very small. So that made everything else bigger, but I think it's in the long run, it's better that way. So just to kind of give you a sense of what that would look like. If it was the first, the way it's set up now, you would be reading through, if you have the book, you would be reading through fear, stress, and anxiety, which is the second heading under the obstacles to joy, and that starts on page 93. Anyway, so it'd be up to about page 100.
Well, and it's
Until
being
next-
recorded. So if we're not gonna be here that week, we can watch it online.
True, very good. Thank you for thinking for me on that.
So that's for next week?
Not yet. Yeah, we'll talk about that at the end today. You can certainly, for next time, get started reading, but I'll be able to cut it back so that there will be that much reading.
And we're not meeting next.
Oh,
Meeting
sorry,
next time.
sorry, the next time. We're not meeting next week because of the Earth Day stuff. Okay, welcome. Thank you all for being here, and we appreciate your interest in this book and in learning about joy and how to find joy in places or times, well, in ourselves, I think, but in face of all of the difficulties that we each experience as individuals, and then the pain and misery in the world.
I see that some people have the book
Yes.
and some don't. Do you all know that we have books here? And where they are?
All right.
They're underneath the coat rack.
So, yeah, yeah, that's what it feels like. There's a bookcase across from Kathy's door, and it's there on the bottom shelf in there. Okey doke.
But you're assuming that we're starting from scratch.
Yes,
Session.
today.
We're okay.
Yes, you're fine today, and it's actually, since most people don't either have the book or haven't read anything because it was only announced once, what you needed to read for today. It's good, it's fine, and we have a very short. Well, we'll have a good discussion, but the reading material is not long. So kind of the format. Oh, what a God. The format for today and probably going forward is I'm gonna read just a lot of these are very, very short, but I'm gonna read a little excerpt from the book, and then I have reflection questions for us to consider. Okay, so we'll try that and see how that works. They're not just like, okay. So the first, if you're a visual and you have a book in your hand, the first little excerpt is on page 3. The paragraph that starts the dollar loan. Dalai Lama and the Archbishop are two of the great spiritual masters of our time, but they're also moral leaders who transcend their own traditions and speak always from a concern for humanity as a whole. Their joy is clearly not easy or superficial, but when burnished by the fire of adversity, oppression, and struggle. Joy, as the Archbishop said during the week, is much bigger than happiness. While happiness is often seen as being dependent on external circumstances, joy is not. So Mark, you know what I didn't do, so I'm sure you figured it out already, is you want to talk for a minute about the context of this?
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, why we're doing this. So last year, as a parish, we all saw a movie that was being broadcast, I think nationwide through a license with the Episcopal Church. And now that movie is available through Netflix or Amazon. So it's not quite as expensive as it used to be. So now I think there's a broader audience for it. And that's what I think is the impetus for this, is that we saw that, we were moved by the movie.
What was the movie?
It was,
Before he tells you, we're gonna show it here on Wednesday evening. Sorry, I didn't want them to go home and watch it. On Wednesday evening, May
This week?
3rd, May 3rd.
What is it?
It's called Mission Joy.
Mr. Joy,
Mm.
right, Mr. Joy. And the movie is different than the book in the sense that it centers more on their relationship. It's more of a relationship story. And then also like they visit a school, so it's very humanistic. While the book does use that as a launching board, however, it goes into much more of the deeper meaning of what happiness is, what joy is, what suffering is. But we think that the movie is a good context because they'll refer to this somewhat funny relationship that they have, you know, I mean, Anglican priest and a Tibetan monk.
Yeah,
Leader.
and the Dalai Lama is very cerebral. Believe it or not. So anyway, that's kind of, and the movie and the book work really, really well together. It just, yeah, so anyway. So the Dalai Lama in the book reminds us that joy is a birthright, even more fundamental than happiness. Any thoughts about that?
Well, it contradicts our for this pursuit of happiness.
Did you all hear that?
Forgot we're talking about this.
Splendor in the ground. No, I'm kidding.
I don't sing very well, but every time we talk about joy, I kind of think of that song. I get the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. You know, it's something we are born with, I think. We beat it out of ourselves.
Yes.
Well, I read ahead.
That's okay.
So happiness is dependent upon outward circumstances and experience, the sensual world. But joy is something inside. Rather than depending on anything else,
And that's according to their teaching, that's,
according to the.
and also, is that how you feel too?
I believe so, yeah. But
Can I ask that people speak up? I'm not sure how well the mic is picking, and we have at least one person who is joining us remotely, so when you're speaking, remember that I won't say use your outside voice, but
We must think alike, because I read this in 2017 when I retired.
Awesome.
I started reading a lot, and And I started and underlined that. That struck me, yeah, oh, that's joy, no, that's happiness. Kind of get it.
Now that you're retired, you can go back to the.
Every day. It's
So you've kind of defined joy and how did, until now, until we started talking about did you feel that joy and happiness were the same thing? Have you ever thought about that?
No, they're different.
Hmm?
They're different.
Is that after having read the book or? Is
No,
that-
there's been other. Readings and expressions of joy along the way that I've picked up.
I certainly did have to learn that. I think as a kid, they were the same, you know, happy, joy. And I had to learn the difference, you know, personally, but also just theologically, that there's a different quality to joy that bubbles up from within. It's not dependent on external circumstance. If you've ever been to a 2/3 world country and seen little children or even adults manifest joy when they have absolutely no reason to be happy about anything, it's there.
Well, I think kids can show you that, when you can see how they can go from complete misery to joy like this. You know, clearly it's not dependent on whatever it was making them sad, changing.
And that made me think of seeing the first time, seeing a baby get that belly laugh and they just set all the way deep down inside. I think that's joy.
I wonder if for children, there isn't as great a distinction as there is for an adult. I think it's natural when they begin to separate as they probably begin to learn the word mind.
Yeah.
Well, I just have a thought. I'm thinking about my almost 104-year-old mother, who she has no joy. She has no happiness. She has no happiness, therefore, because along the way, well, I won't make a judgment.
Go ahead.
It's easy. But her happiness is dependent upon her experiences, you know, the good food, the good music, the good clothes and so forth. And now she's stripped of all that. But then I've met other older people who have this joy and they're in the same circumstances. And I think they've cultivated, they haven't been dependent on these exterior input sources.
Would you say happiness is closer related to materialism?
Would what?
Materialism than joy?
I would.
I think happiness is more singular than joy. Joy has, like he says, it's more broad. Here's an example. I think only the Germans can come up with the word Schadenfreude, right? You know what I mean? So there was joy at someone else's suffering, which, you know, in my book isn't so good. I mean, so happiness would always be more of a good feeling, optimistic feeling. It doesn't have like a set of moral things attached to it. And
Worked in the South a lot, and then going back into the, maybe it was just a term they used, right? I still remember the old Birmingham. And pretty much Baptist kind of area, but they would say, we'd be under stress trying to build projects and fighting the management and everybody else. And they would say, Kurt, don't let anybody steal your joy. That would be kind of saying that people would say to get you back up on the horse, you know. I remember that. Never really thought about what that meant. I liked it.
Can you be furious and still have joy?
Yeah.
I think so, like when you mentioned the South, the whole thing with racism came up, unfortunately. But I was thinking of some of the photos I saw during hangings, and there would be people's faces were filled with joy, even kids. And, but I don't think they were happy. Yeah, sorry for bringing that up. I think that is a difference between someone happy and someone who's good.
So do you think the grown-ups were happy or joyful?
I think well, I wasn't
I'm
there.
just curious.
I can only,
But in
I,
reading the picture,
reading the picture, I would think that in sort of a Schadenfreude sense, that the adults were joyful that they were doing that. They felt that they should be doing it, and they were joyful that they got doing the action. I don't think the kids really understood. I think they were just mimicking the behavior of their parents. But again, I really can't say for sure because of
right, you know, I'm just was curious.
So, you know, some of this is my Canadian ignorance, although I've lived long enough here, I shouldn't be still hanging on to that. Are you saying that the joy was on the faces of the whites or the blacks?
Oh, the whites.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, that was unclear
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
You know,
Kurt, you mentioned the phrase, don't let them steal your joy. So I'm gonna throw out another question, I guess. But so, you know, that implies that you or anyone possesses their own joy. Now, but is that joy, should that joy just be possessed by that person, or is it something that should be shared? Held on, you know, should you just hold on to it for yourself, or should it be something that is?
I don't know, I mean, it was always set in the context and it gets back to maybe this real definition of it being more intrinsic joy, because the only way I steal it, in other words, external factors, you just cut my salary, you took my bonus away, whatever the issue is, still don't let them steal your joy. Don't let them take that away. They take a lot of things away.
Steal your happiness, but not your.
Yeah, it's still my happiness, yeah, not my joy. That's what I think.
Part is, I don't know that you can associate joy with shoulds. I think it exudes. If you've got it, it exudes, and there's no should about it. It just happens. That makes sense.
So you said it just happens. Does that mean that you can't cultivate it?
I'm sure there are things you can do to extinguish it if you want to. But if you've got it, I don't think you can stop it.
so that might raise the question of how could someone steal your joy? What would the circumstances be? And I'm wondering if that means that you turn your focus away from the goodness of God, the goodness of life, and focus on the negatives. If that isn't how someone could steal their joy.
It reminds me a little bit of dignity when you describe what things might take away, might steal your joy. That's something else that came to mind, was kind of dignity, stealing your dignity.
Well, I have a relational comment that if you continually be your psyche is beaten down, you know, you're not good enough, you can't do this, you're stupid, you're selfish, you're, you know, just the negative messages. I believe your joy can be stolen if you're beaten down enough.
Seems like the message, though, what I was hearing, because I'm actually listening to the book, I was listening to it on the way over here. That it's more the joy
of serving others and doing for others. And so the beaten down and all of that is more what's happening to you as an individual. And I'm thinking of a family member who's so focused on all the horrible things that have happened in their life. And so almost hermit-like that they are not experiencing any kind of joy because they're so internally focused. And it seems like joy is the external, how you, and even in the work that I do, working with people that have been beaten down and have experienced a lot of trauma, there's still joy for me in helping.
You have joy for helping. How are they doing?
They're getting there. I mean, they still struggle and there's still crises every other day.
So they can be helped by the person who is. You get joy helping them and that moves over to them.
I wouldn't say, I mean, I'm helping them to help themselves. It's more of an empowering thing. I wouldn't say that I'm doing it for them or that it gives me joy to see them succeed. But they're finding a way to do that.
And then maybe they'll experience joy once again.
I think it's kind of that pay it forward idea. Infectious. Or cyclical.
As I've been listening to y'all, I was reminded, and I thought, gosh, did I read this in this book or did I? I've been reading a bunch of other things. And then, so at the bottom of page 7, I don't know who said this, or it's just Abrams, he says, suffering is inevitable, but how we respond is our choice. Not even oppression or occupation can take away this freedom to choose our response. And I think, you know, and what I wrote in the margin is Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
You know, man searching for meaning, and here's something he said, you know, a concentration camp, people were despairing and giving up all the time, and he said, I'm not going to do that. You know, and I don't know if in his book he was so much focused on sort of the issues of serving others, or if he just found he could internalize some sense of meaning for himself that they could not take away. And I translated that into the conversation here about joy as having it stolen. And I was glad that it was happening in this book. That was something else I read last week.
Well, you know, and I think too, that it's a really important thing to remember that we believe in a God of resurrection. So even though something might beat us down temporarily, we can be reborn into joy. It doesn't have to be a permanent state.
No, that's true.
There's also, theologically, it's a fruit of the Holy Spirit. You know, Galatians talks about the fruit of the Spirit. Corinthians talks about gifts of the Holy Spirit, which are things like faith and knowledge and wisdom and discernment. But in Galatians, Paul talks about the fruit of the Spirit being love and joy and peace, patience, kindness, long suffering. I'm not sure, there's a couple of others.
Gentleness.
Gentleness. Yeah, right. Thank you. The fruit is something that emerges. It's not something that you can make happen in a sense that. So it's the presence of God within us that brings joy, and certainly that's true for Christians, but I think it's true for anybody. God's within everyone, not just us. And so if we pay attention to the God within, and try to let those fruits emerge, grow. Joy is one of them. Not happiness. That's not listed.
Right. Yeah. Happiness is more of a external catalyst causes happiness. You know, that spark of happiness, the child looking at it perfectly candid, things like that. I want to connect these two ideas between Carla and Gary, and that is when you said people are downtrodden or struggling, right? What came to my mind was, do they have resilience? And then what causes resilience? How does one get resilience? Is it with happiness, or is it with a lifetime of experiencing struggles and that you've overcome? So the pursuit of happiness is not what it's about. As opposed to decoration.
So are you all familiar, I'm not totally, but are you all familiar with the lives of the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and what types of lives they live.
Not the Dalai
I don't know, Gary, do you know that, or Bishop about Desmond Tutu, I don't,
What about him?
about his life prior, well, his life in general, what kind of struggles and suffering he's had a lot.
Yeah, he grew up in apartheid South Africa,
Oh,
you
that's
know,
right, yeah.
and as a little boy. One of the stories is that as a little boy, he was walking with his mother down the street and a white Anglican priest, I think it was Trevor Huddleston, tipped his hat to Desmond's mother. And he was just absolutely blown away that a white man would acknowledge his mother in that way. And so he connected that with the priest, and gradually grew in his life of faith in seminary, and became a parish priest and the dean of the cathedral in Johannesburg. And it was in the middle of the struggles, you know, the whole apartheid movement, and he gradually, you know, like a lot of these leaders, he was sort of catapulted into it. It's not something he sort of went out and sought, but he was ultimately found himself in the center of that whole storm. And then he was made a bishop and then archbishop finally. And all during this period, the troubles were happening, and he was out there on the front lines. And I remember him even as a young person, how he could be so sure that the victory was already won. He kept saying that. He would say, you know, this is going to pass. This is temporary, you know. And it didn't look temporary, and I'm sure it didn't to a lot of the folks, but he had this ebullient sense of joy, which you can see in him anytime you see any kind of visual of him. That joy is just there. But he was tough. I mean, he was strong, and he was arrested, went through the kind of things that Dr. King did. Basically in his time, but he always was a leader. He was protected to some degree because of his prominence in the church, and so he probably he didn't end up like Mandela, you know, but he certainly suffered in that apartheid system all his life.
With regard to his being protected by his position. He came to a gathering, an ecumenical gathering, of college students that I attended in, well, I don't make it really any difference. But because it was an ecumenical gathering, he met privately with the Episcopalians for an individual conversation. And somebody asked him, and I'm going to stand up, and somebody asked him, well, Bishop, how can you do the things that, how can you say the things that you say? How can you do the things you do? Aren't you afraid? He goes, I haven't retired archbishop, what can they do to me?
Exactly how he thought.
You've never seen him.
Yeah. His amazing sense of humor. Just he came to us once, and he was at a House of Bishops meeting, and came to we're in Houston at Camp Allen, and he was there just in his sweatshirt and jeans like the rest of us. He wasn't all decked out. But he said one time, he said, "I'm starting to put on weight. They're going to start calling me Desmond 3-3."
So, and then, of course, the Dalai Lama was exiled from his home for ever, 50
Well,
years.
Even before that,
Yeah.
story of his childhood is this. Do you want me to?
Sure, go ahead.
So he was born, you know, in a poor village by Archbishop, known by nobody except for the folks in his community and family. And when the previous Dalai Lama, the belief within the Tibetan Buddhism is that they are reincarnated into another person. So when the previous Dalai Lama passed, then there were priests that went out on this holy search for where did this soul get reincarnated, and they found him in the Dalai Lama. And so then he was taken to the
At age
at
2
3 years old. Yeah. And there was 10,000 rooms in this palace, And he didn't have any other children to play with during his childhood. You know, it's sort of like the Buddhist story of starting at great wealth, isolated. And then when the Chinese invaded, then his roles shifted from a religious leader to a political leader now, because he was the state person for the Tibetan population. And then when they started losing the war, then he had to go into exile. And he said somewhere, and I don't think it was in this book, but I remember an interview that he was happy with that happened. He was so thankful that happened, because he would not have been the person he is today if he was still exiled in the palace, isolated from everything around him. And he felt that his soul expanded because of that trauma. That's resilience. Huh?
You know what?
There was a good movie made in '97, but Martin Scorsese was the one who made it, called Kundun, K-U-N-D-U-N, which has the early part of his life until he goes across the hills to India. And so that gives all of that side. And then there was the other one, was 7 years in Tibet with Henry Herr, who he helps tutor, and part of that story, he helps tutor the Dalai Lama. So both of those movies came out about the same time. There was this huge fascination in the West about the Dalai Lama. They were both there.
What was the first movie?
Kundun, K-U-N-D-U-N, one word. Music by Philip Glass.
Oh.
So knowing now what you know about these two people, do you feel like they have any perhaps expertise, or do you think that they are uniquely set to be able to talk about joy, real joy? And what is it? Why do you think so?
I read something somewhere, and I am terrible about quoting properly and citing, so I apologize in advance. But someone once wrote something like, "Do not be afraid of being disloyal to your pain by embracing joy." And I think that they are in a great position to model that.
Well, I think that by the nature of Buddhism, as little as I understand, there is so much meditation that goes on, and further in the chapter they talk about Tutu is amazed that the Dalai Lama prays for 5 hours a day, and he said, and Tutu said, I only do 3 hours a day. I think after meditating for years and years for 5 hours a day, you probably have figured a few things out. So I think he's pretty qualified.
So on page 7, these two men remind us that how we choose to act each day is what matters. So is this a radical idea for you? That how you respond to suffering, you have a choice. That's your choice, how you choose to respond to suffering.
I mean, that, you mentioned Viktor Frankl, I mean, that's his whole book, is how we respond. But that's our choice.
Right. Is that, have you ever thought of that? Is that a radical idea to you?
I guess I wonder if everybody can do that. I know that some people can, and I know that it's the right thing to do. Does everybody have a choice?
I think it takes training and coaching, mentoring. Help.
Practice.
Awareness, you have to be aware that you have a choice. I think that's the first step. not everybody, I think they could probably do it, Chris, but I'm not sure they're all aware they
Right.
can.
Right, if you've been beaten down and oppressed and all the rest for so long, you may not know you have a choice. You haven't been given a choice in anything else, so
Right.
why should I be given a choice in this?
And obviously.
Can't choose where to live, I can't choose where to
Mhm.
go to school.
And I think that's the big message in this book. To start right off the bat is, you know. You can choose it, and
Yeah, so I'm hearing these two steps, you have to recognize. And then the more difficult step, at least for me, is the practice. That you know you're supposed to do it. It's hard to do. In John Kabat-Zinn's book, Catastrophe Living, he talks about stop. And have you ever heard of that? So when you feel like you're in that moment and blood pressure's rising, you have to stop, take a breath, observe it, and then proceed.
Mhm.
And that little pause, you know, even if you just count to three. That's-
I also think that you can nurture it. I mean, we talk about those that couldn't because no one cared, but I was, I think, born luckily into a family that knew about it and I could watch it and I could see what happened when people chose it and, or, you know, or in some ways just plain taught me. So, you know, not everyone has to suffer without that instruction.
Right. So, another quote that I know, and I have no idea where it came from. Pain, I think it's a Buddhist, pain is gonna happen, suffering is optional.
Hmm.
Listening to you all, it was interesting to me because as an only child, I was melded together by my parents. And I had one parent who had a really strong family, joyful, big family, get together and so forth. And my father was in a very destructive family. And, you know, they really struggled. And it was interesting, now that I can think back on it, watching the two try to meld together. And they never quite got there. But you know, fortunately, my mother was the one I was really close to, and that made me who I am today. But every once in a while, as Bev will tell you, my father comes out of me. And my father, you know, he always felt people were taking advantage of him. So he was very defensive. He really was watching out for himself. And, you know, he grew up very poor and he was determined he wasn't going to be poor when he died. And you know, the interesting thing is when we cleaned out his closet, there were clothes there that had never been opened and never been used. But it came out of him growing up in the Depression where he had nothing.
Was gonna have something.
And he was going to have something. So I think a lot of this depends on how you're brought up and how you evolve into that, you know. I think your parents have a great deal of influence on that.
But you know, it's education, how important education starts with parents.
Yeah.
If you don't have parents that can do it, then how important the schools are, the preschools, I mean, to help these children know that they do have a choice. Because they may not have had the experience, they may have had two parents like.
Yeah. I mean, my mother had joy to the day she died.
Yeah.
I have a question for you all, listening to Jim. Made me think that the opening line in Anna Karenina's, or Tolstoy's Anna Karenina is, all happy families are happy in the same way, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. And my question is, once you think about that, do you think that's true? And why is that? Either true or not true? All happy families are happy in their own way, but all unhappy families are unhappy. Oh, wait, happy families are happy the same way.
Same.
I would say somewhat. Not committing. I think there's common elements to being happy, but there may be different ways that they experience it. I think unhappy, everybody has different histories and different experiences. I mean, they may have the same themes in terms of struggle and trauma. I don't know.
So going back to the internal and external, so happiness, if happiness is more external than a happy family, then families will see the happiness as external. We don't know necessarily that internally they're happy.
Yes,
Yes.
Well, I always
yes.
think about Dolly Parton and her coat of many colors, and they were so poor. But there was joy there. And I look at my mother's upbringing and they were poor, but there was no joy. In her parents, they felt victimized, you know, through the depression, and there was no joy. And so there's bad circumstances. Here's one family that comes out with joy.
Something's different. Right?
Yeah,
Is it the difference between optimism and pessimism?
yeah. Yeah,
The resilience between surrender.
Between what?
The difference between resilience and surrender.
Or resolving yourself, but this is what I'm
Resolve.
stuck with. This is what I'm stuck with.
Or being resigned, yeah,
Resign.
So.
yeah. Because surrendering is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, resign.
Resign, resignation, yeah.
It's they have an external locus of control.
And, you know, if you think of that word resignation, I mean, we think of it work-wise as I quit. Right? But when you resign yourself to a situation, you know, in essence, you're saying, you know, I give up, I quit, nothing I can do, you've given up your power.
Well, you could resign to the situation and say, okay, but I'm gonna be happy anyway.
Yeah.
That's more acceptance though, I think.
Hmm.
And maybe that's the first step,
Mhm.
but.
So you were talking about people having not much of anything
Right.
and still having joy, and immediately I went to the folks that I know, that a lot of folks that I know that live on the street. And particularly the ones that I preached about when I was in Atlanta, and there was always joy. And, you know, having so very, very little, and oftentimes not even knowing where their meals are gonna come from. And we got in this big circle for the prayers of the people. And yes, some people did, you know, pray about, you know, things about them that they needed healing for, but by and large, all of the prayers were prayers of thanksgiving for what they had. It was a lesson, because it's so difficult.
Think about African American worship. I know they weren't all African Americans, but I'm sure
Yeah, most of
a
it.
good percentage were. You know, there's no more joyful worship than African American music and praise and worship. Why? You know, it's something to do with joy. It has something to do with beyond the external circumstances. We look out at our own congregations and well, never mind. Hallelujah. Lord is risen indeed. Hallelujah. Smile once more.
Good discussion. Good thoughts.
See if Andy has the.
Andy, hi Andy. Do you have any? Yeah.
He's muted.
Oh,
He's
okay.
muted.
Hello.
Anything?
There he is.
I think the only thing that comes to mind is
Hang on, sir.
Oh, hold on.
hello.
No, it's on, just turned down. Try again, Andy.
All right, can you hear me? you know, the only thing that came to mind was just sort of thinking about defining joy by its opposite. Or I guess I sort of think of happiness and sadness, right? So happy and sad, or why are you sad today? Oh, because something happened, or I've been sad because of an event, you know. What is joy? Is it despair? Or so maybe I was trying to think of what would be so defining it by its opposite, and I was still just sort of thinking about that, I guess. And the other thing that came to mind is contentment, or being content. You know, is that joy, or is joy the next level of contentment? Because your sort of contentment is you are not affected by the external necessarily. You are content in your circumstances. But then you can kind of take that to a next level of I'm joyful. But does that mean you need something external to get you out of contentment to joy? I don't know. Those are just some things I was thinking about. No answers, but
Thanks. Yeah. Does anybody want to respond to those?
Well, and I think you can have joy and not be content with circumstances. I'm not sure that's the opposite.
Well, and I think of contentment, it makes me think back to the conversation about acceptance or resignation, that you can be content and say, well, I'm content, I love my job, but I'll deal with it or whatever. I'm content with my circumstances. It could be better, but
Can you hear all this, Andy?
yes. So what's the opposite of joy?
So that's
For
my
me-
question.
For me, the opposite of joy is fear. I think it
Fear.
depends on how you face the situation. Are you optimistic? Hey, everything's gonna fall in place, or are you fearful that, man, everything's gonna go south? And, you know, and a current example, I mean, when we went up to clean up our son's house in Cheyenne, do you feel like, hey, you know, everything's gonna come together and be fine, or everything's gonna be a disaster? And I think that impacts on how you approach the situation. You know, do you approach it in a positive standpoint, or do you approach it, this isn't gonna work, you know? So there's my answer, Andy.
I was jumping on despair, but I think that's not true. I think despair, the opposite of despair is, hope is the opposite of despair. You have hope that something's gonna happen, or you despair that it can possibly happen. So that's probably not exactly it. Fear is good. Not sure. That's a great question, though. Happiness and sadness is easy to see, but joy and what?
Grumpiness?
Depression, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Sort of.
people say, you know, the opposite of love is
Exactly.
Right. The absence.
Go ahead, Andy. The stage is yours, Andy.
No, well, you know, I'll go exit stage left because I'm not sure I have much more. But that's what's just going to struggle. What, you know, if I was trying to figure out, well, yeah, nothing more.
Good thought, though, really good thought. So on page 11, it says, we're fragile creatures, and it is from this weakness, not despite it, that we discover the possibility of true joy. Or did you do all the study guide in the back?
I don't use study guides.
He just comes from the school where you always underline the first sentence.
The last paragraph.
So thinking of the word, what was the word of fragility and weakness? Think about the fact that, I think you know that Bishop Tutu had cancer. And I think he went in remission, and then it came back, and in remission, and it came back. So do you think that the fickleness perhaps of our health has any impact on how, if we seek joy? What about the urgency? Is it urgency of poor health or our fragility as human beings, even perhaps?
Well, don't most doctors say that if you have a real positive attitude as you're approaching cancer, you have a better chance of beating it or at least getting it into remission? Whereas if you say, I'm gonna die. Yeah.
Your body believes every word you say. You're hooked by that title, I think it's true.
That was certainly my experience.
Is that despite the fragility, or does the fragility cause that? I have a hard time thinking that the weakness and fragility actually causes joy. Joy is what we use to come against it.
But I wonder if it's, kind of like those foxhole prayers, God, if you get me out of this, I will. I wonder if it doesn't put a different perspective on life. I know people who, gone through a near-death experience talk a lot about, I saw life as more precious on the other side. And I wonder, if it gets our attention, it helps us to be more aware of the joy of life if we recognize how fragile it is. Because I think most of us, I look at my, my 20, 30, 40 something children, and they're still in that pretty invincible stage. And it's like, honey, at some point you're going to recognize the timeline is not infinite here.
Speaking of foxhole prayer, I'll never forget this. About 20 years ago, there was a parishioner in this church, and he had been in the Vietnam War, and he was in a foxhole one day, and he was sure he was going to die. And the only thing he could think to do was kneel down and say the Lord's Prayer. And that had a profound impact on me. And it's part of the reason when we do say the Lord's Prayer, when we're in the sanctuary, I'll kneel for it. I'll never forget that.
Well, back to my brief experience with that. I very definitely had the experience of realizing that life has a lot more meaning than I had been assigned to it. And that I felt like I was being given a second chance, or actually what actually came to me very shortly after I found out I was diagnosed with cancer, like within 5 minutes, right after I called Rod, was you have work to do. I was like, yes, sir. It was so clear that somehow I knew strongly, but I said I knew it was God telling me, and that was like, yeah, you're not going anywhere. But so I didn't take advantage of that. I saw that as a reason to forge on, and I think I was filled with joy a lot of the time, but not a sense of urgency, a tremendous sense of peace through the whole thing, but always a positive attitude.
Been diagnosed twice with cancer, and both times very early stages. Never had to do chemo. Lost a kidney, lost some intestines, lost a few pieces of parts I didn't need. But boy, it gives you a sense of appreciation. Every day's a blessing.
Gratitude must be related to joy too, in that sense, in the sense of being grateful that you have one more day, or that
In faith,
Oh, yeah.
that's kind of.
Yep.
It's with faith that whatever happens, it's going to be okay.
Yep.
Where are we? Close.
And then you're going to a sound check. We have.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I guess we'll close unless anybody has a a burning desire to share something or something that you didn't get to share yet? Okay. So I will go back and edit the assignments, if you will, but for right now, on your way out, and hopefully I don't know if you don't need to know. On the way out, there's a piece of like off-white paper with some questions to reflect on. Actually, it's quotes from the book to go back and reflect on. That will inform questions and discussion for next time. And I will revise the readings so that they're not so long, but honestly, they're not intensive readings. I don't.
It's a pleasure.
It is,
Pleasure.
isn't it? I kind of found that too, that it felt good to just sit down and read a few pages at a time or whatever. So, good. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you all for being here.
Appreciate it.
And if you didn't get
Thank you.
Andy, I'm gonna shut this down. Good to see you.
Bye, thank you, Krista.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Oh, sure.